One of the biggest problems with learning about safety is how many misconceptions are out there. Even today, you'll still hear well-meaning adults saying you should cooperate when armed bad guys want to take you someplace else, or that you should teach kids about stranger danger, or to still use rescue breathing when performing CPR. Spencer Coursen has spent his career in the crucibles of Special Forces missions, on-the-ground executive protection, and high-level security consulting, testing ideas he heard to see whether or not they hold up to the standards of reality. His new book, The Safety Trap, is the result of that lifetime of testing. He was kind enough to perform a two-part episode with me, exploring 10 of the most important and most common safety myths in the world. Listen here for part 1, then check the show notes for a link to part 2 over on his podcast, Coursen's Corner. If you haven't yet, please do hit the like and subscribe buttons. I don't know why they help as much as they do, but that little bit on your part does a lot for us. If you love us and you have $3 to spare, follow the link to Patreon and back us there. Thank you so much. Now, let's get to work. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and with me today is Spencer Coursen. Hello, Spencer.
Hello, Jason. How are you, sir?
So far, so good. How about your own self?
Doing very well. Living the best life I can here in Austin, Texas.
Outstanding. Now, Spencer comes to us from a lifetime in security and safety and looking out after people as a professional bodyguard, and before that with military experience. He's the host of Coursen's Corner, which is a podcast where we're doing a two-part episode with him today where we'll do half here and half over there. So be sure to go over there to Coursen's Corner when you're done with us here. And I got to tell you, his podcast goes deep. There's not a lot of people who can think to themselves, man, I want to do an episode on domestic abuse and stalking, and then just call up a judge who spent the better part of 10 years in charge of those cases for an entire major city.
I have been very fortunate in my career to have not just the military, not just the government sector experience, but also have the celebrity side in my pocket as well. And through all of those, you're exposed to just a vast network of people in a cross section of professions. And one of the things I have always really, made sure was a priority for me was networking, was learning who people were just sort of developing those power partners. And that has really helped me as I went into business for myself, as I launched the podcast, as I'm now promoting the book, to really get the insights and the experiences from the people who are out there on the front line doing the real work to help good people make bad things better, so that we can take those protective strategies and make them digestible and relatable and practical and ultimately employable by all of the listeners and all the readers. So thank you very much for all of your support.
Now, you mentioned while you're promoting the book, The Safety Trap, which you've also got there stacked up behind you. Tell us a little bit about The Safety Trap.
So The Safety Trap is 44 years of my global experience as a threat management expert, helping others to ensure the certainty of their safety. And what I itemized throughout my experiences was that people were falling into 15 of these very common safety traps, these false senses of security that kind of allowed us to lower our defenses, even though real trouble was out there. And the safety trap is a term that I coined a few years ago when trying to explain this paradox to my clients, that actually when we feel the most safe is when we are the most at risk. Because, the one thing that my global experience has proven is that when we don't expect to see danger, we have a tendency to not look for, the warning signs that something bad is about to happen. But those warning signs are always there, and staying safe is about training ourselves to see them. And so what I wanted to do with this book was say, hey, here's a case study where something broke bad. Here's what happened. Then the next section is, here's how it was allowed to happen. And then I end each chapter with 5 protective takeaways. Here's 5 things that you can do to keep this from happening to you. And then what I really wanted this book to be was, come for the story, but stay for the lesson. Here's a story about how someone who employed avoidance got themselves into trouble. Here's someone where overconfidence came into play. Here's where false equivalence came into play. Here's what the difference is between accountability and survivability. And what I really wanted people to do was take a real hard, honest assessment of their own lives so that they could see where those false senses of security could come into play, so that they could see the warning signs that harm was about to happen, so that they could keep that from happening to themselves. I mean, at its most reductive level, we don't stub our toes on the things we notice. We stub our toes on the things we don't. But it's not like that toy on the floor just appeared out of nowhere. It was there. Yeah. You just weren't expecting to see it. Therefore, you didn't see it. Therefore, you stubbed your toe. And so I sort of adopted this framework of awareness plus preparation equals safety. And if we can just apply that to our everyday lives, we can help to ensure the certainty of safety for not just us, but for our loved ones, our family, our coworkers, our colleagues. We can ensure the certainty of safety for everyone involved.
And to that point, that brings us to our business here today, where Spencer and I, before the show, made a list of 10 safety trap-esque misconceptions that are very common among parents and just in the community at large. And we're just going to address them one by one today.
Absolutely. I think it's important that these are 10 misconceptions that almost everybody prescribes to. Mm-hmm. They are in no particular order other than in the order they appear, because everyone's circumstance and scenario is different. But do you want to start us off with number one?
Sure thing. Number one was safety and security are basically the same thing.
It's true, right? I mean, everyone kind of goes, oh, I just want to be safe and secure, but they are often used interchangeably, but they really do mean different things. I think the real difference between safety and security is if you use it like the umbrella reference, where the umbrella, the canopy, the part that's actually blocking the rain, that's security. Feeling safe is how we feel underneath. Safety is feeling warm and dry, but security is the overarching umbrella. And I think that a lot of times, if you have a child who is, sleeping soundly in their own bed, they may be physically secure, but they're not going to feel safe if they think there's a monster hiding in the closet. And while a mother's love may make you feel safe, a mother's love alone is not enough to keep you protected from the hazards of the outside world. But so in order to feel safe, there has to be that emotional and physical, those two things need to be congruent. But security is ultimately about the safeguards that keep those risks from ever becoming a reality. And if those are in place and they are working as they are supposed to, and they are doing the job as we expect them to perform, only then can we truly feel safe. And so the difference ultimately between safety and security is the safeguards that are in place that we expect to work so that we can feel safe knowing that they are working. And the problem is when there's a breakdown in the security, we have an overemphasis of anxiety because now we feel that our safety is threatened. So it's important to understand the difference between those two.
It puts me in mind of, if you remember Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, the urgent important matrix.
Yes.
Where you can have a situation where you're safe and secure, a situation where you're neither of those things, a situation where you're secure and not safe, and a situation where you're safe but not secure. And each of those things requires a different solution.
Yeah, I mean, think about just like in terms of being in a car accident. If you are safe in your car, but then you go driving down the street and you get broadsided, even though the next time you go out, you're still just as safe as you were before, you may not feel secure because everyone else isn't abiding by those same rules of the road. And so you really need to have the congruence of the safeguards plus the emotional certainty in order for safety and security to be working in Congress.
No, that makes very good sense. It's I'd never seen it phrased just that way, but it makes intuitive sense, and then it gets backed up anytime you look in situations where things go wrong. It's often when you feel secure, and that may even be one of the main theses of the book, when you feel secure, but you're not actually safe.
Well,
is when danger really starts.
that is the premise of the safety trap. It
Mhm.
was the safety trap is a phrase that I coined a few years ago when trying to explain to my clients the false sense of security that comes when our fear has been abated, but risk remains.
Mhm.
Someone breaks into your house. You know, we see this all the time with like school shootings. You know,
Mhm.
something bad happens, then there's this rally cry, hey, we're going to do all of these things, but then nothing actually changes. Then some time goes by, and you know the protests die down, and the politicians go back to championing some other promotable agenda, and the news cycle moves on, and then another thing happens. It's like, yeah, the fear had been abated, but we did nothing to prevent those things from happening. And so that is the crux, that is the paradox, if you will, of the safety trap. We are often most at risk when we feel most safe.
See also late hits in football or boxing.
100%.
That's why they're illegal.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
or we just saw that with like a UFC fight a couple weeks ago where the guy
Yeah.
was down on his knee, and so he wasn't protecting his head, because the UFC says if the guy's on his knee or if his head is lower than your knee, head strikes are not legal. And what's the first rule of anyone who's ever been in a boxing ring? Protect yourself at all times.
At all times.
Right? Because
Yeah.
the moment you don't, you're vulnerable. And as soon as you
Yeah.
feel that you're safe and you no longer need to protect yourself, that's when you are most at risk.
Absolutely. So how about number 2? What's our
number 2 is, and this kind of goes to this has been a pet peeve of mine for years, but stranger danger. And I have this, I talk about this in the book, in the chapter Overprotecting Children. And one of the things I talk about is, stranger danger is one of those interesting key concepts that parents like to say to their kids because it's easy to understand and it's easy to remember. But
it has to be true because it rhymes, right?
Right. And if only that was, the case for everything, we'd just be in such a safer world. But one of the things I talk about is that stranger danger is a one-way street. While it is, the creepy guy in the van who quote unquote has a missing cat, it is wildly inappropriate for that man to ask a young child to help him find his kitten. But if alone and afraid and not sure what to do, your child should be empowered to participate in their own protection and ask a stranger for help. And so parents are then, well, how do we know which stranger is okay to ask? So I talk about the 3 F's of child safety: flags, families, and food. If you see someone with a flag on their shoulder, or if you see a flag outside of a building, or if you see a flag on a uniform, that is someone that a child can feel confident to ask for help. Same thing with if you see families, if you see an adult with small children, that that's a parent who understands the importance of caretaking children, or the importance of safeguarding and taking care of children. So they should feel safe going up to those people to ask for help. And then lastly, food. Restaurants, food vendors. If you're lost in a park and you see the ice cream cart or the hot dog vendor or the pretzel guy or woman, those are people that you can go, they should feel comfortable going up to and ask for help, because that those people during the permit process have had a background check, have had licensing, and those people, especially those people, are going to want to do the very best they can, because not just it's the right thing to do, but it's altruistic, and it could very well lead to more promotion for their own business or their own brand to do what they need to do. And you and I were talking offline, even like, what about like, people who, the alt-right or Proud Boys or these, these politically, militia types who have the flags on the uniform. Listen, children don't have political ideologies. Okay. Even people who have extremist political ideology, the one good thing about humankind is that we universally care about children. And we are I would say 99.9% of the population, if they see a child in need, is going to do everything they can to help keep that child protected. But what is most important is that your child understands that they have your permission to ask an adult, even if it's a stranger, for help. Because one of the anecdotes that I talk about in The Safety Trap is a mother and daughter who were lost, who were visiting the zoo in Central Park, and the daughter wandered off. And, fortunately she was found, a very short time later, but she was sitting on a park bench, and the mom was like, how come you didn't ask anyone for help? And she said, everyone was a stranger, and, you just saw the heartbreak on her mother's face, because she had been, championing this philosophy that she thought was to ensure her child's safety, but had actually endangered her in the process because the child took it so literally. So I think it's important that we understand that misconception that stranger equals danger. Stranger does, like, again, stranger danger is one-way street. Wildly inappropriate for an adult to ask a child for help. Perfectly acceptable for a child to identify an adult who makes them feel comfortable, who trusts their own sense of self-defense, to say, hey, I'm in need. This looks like someone that can help me. I'm going to ask them for help.
And most people who've been working in security have known it was a bad call since the late 90s, after that research got done with, giving a kid a stranger danger talk, and then less than 20 minutes later have someone approach them in a park and lead them away. And when asked, well, why did you go with him? Well, he wasn't a stranger. He was nice. Kids asked to draw pictures of strangers, they'd have horns.
Right.
And so it wasn't something that kids could really wrap their heads around in a meaningful way. Plus, when you need help, you have to ask a stranger, because part of needing a help when you're a kid is not being around the adults you know.
Well, not so just
you
that,
have
but like,
to.
But even in today's world where we're using our phones to have food delivered to our house, to have cars come and pick us up. How many, I would assume that by, a child who was born, 3 years ago, by the time they're 5, is going to have gotten into a car with their parents 100 times with a complete stranger. But the important thing is that this was a stranger that we brought to us. We asked for that stranger to come to us. It's not like we were sitting on the street corner and some strange car came up to us and said, hey, do you need a ride? That's the difference. That is the stranger danger is a one-way street philosophy that we really need to have because kids don't understand nuance. It's very hard for them to understand the complexity of adult human dynamic. But by explaining to them, hey, if you're asking for help, that's fine, but they should not be asking you for help. That is not okay.
I think that's an important through line too about an adult coming to a child is still statistically unlikely to be a bad guy, but exponentially more likely to be a bad guy than the adult a child approaches.
Yes, 1,000%. I don't know what the percentages of pedophiles in the world, but listen, between your child definitely being in danger and your child quite possibly being in, or a rare possibility, like an absolute certainty of danger versus the very high likelihood of being able to circumvent that danger, give them the power to circumvent that danger. Let's not live in a world of fear. Let's actually realistically and practically and rationally participate in our own safety, rather than ostracizing ourselves to the isolation of anxiety, which ultimately is detrimental to not just our mental health, but our physical well-being as well.
And on top of that, just from a very, very security, defensive standpoint, if there's, for example, a fair and there is a pedophile looking for a victim there, the kid who is boldly walking up to people and asking for help is not going to get on his radar, but the kid kind of crouched in the back, not knowing what to do, he's going to get that predator's full and undivided attention.
Yeah, 100%. And can I and those people who are those adult males who are trolling those fairgrounds or those amusement parks or those areas where children do come to play, the security teams there are so alert as to those people that if you just watch and you just see some guy standing next to a popcorn stand with no wife and no kids around him and he's just standing there watching, you're going to see a plainclothes detective, like, come up to that person pretty quickly. I don't know what the stat is, but I would be willing to bet that, and I'm not saying this as fact, but a significant number of people who are walking around Disneyland park, Disneyland or any of these big are plainclothes policemen who are very, who are very intent on finding those people who would be preying on children. So the likelihood, and again, we're not telling your child to go up to just like some random stranger. We're saying, hey, do you see a police officer with a flag on his uniform? Do you see, you're not going to talk to the guy who's eating the popcorn. You're going to talk to the guy who's selling the popcorn. You're going to talk to the mom who's pushing the stroller, or the dad that has, his daughter's hand in his, and as they're walking to what have you. So again, we're trying to focus on empowering our children with protective strategies that they can employ, not just in their youth, but for the rest of their life, rather than we are trying to burden them with the anxiety of fear.
Putting tools in that toolbox.
100%.
And I really like the 3 Fs as an evolution, because of course in Gavin de Becker's book, Protecting the Gift,
great book.
He gave the advice of finding a mother with children specifically. And when I was running my martial arts school, my young students, we'd have that chant. We'd talk about various safety things, and the chant we had was, if you can't find your mom, find someone else's mom. And how do you know they're your mom? They have a kid. Yeah. But this is such an evolution beyond that, by adding 2 additional tools and wrapping it up in a way that still remains easy for a kid to remember and to walk through in a mental checklist if they're in trouble.
Yeah, and again, like, I would even not say like a mother with kids, but just like an adult with kids, because
a family.
It doesn't have to be a family, because like, if it's a nanny with kids, or what if it's an au pair, or what if it's like, but just that combination of adult with child, safe. Go to them, ask for help. You know what I mean? Don't get into the family nuclear, like don't, because kids will take things literally. Like, don't talk to strangers. Got it. Everyone's a stranger. I'm not going to ask for help. But hey, if you see a family, if you see food, if you see flags, those are people you can go to for help. I think so stranger danger, bad.
Absolutely.
What was number 3?
Number 3 is the police are responsible for your personal safety. This one's nuanced, but very interesting and important for us all to internalize and understand, I think.
It is. The job of police is to police. Policing is different than protection. Police are responsible for public safety. They are not responsible for your personal safety, which is why when you see, so just here in Austin, there was the risk of an active shooter at a place downtown. And the police immediately told everyone in the surrounding area to shelter in place. And they told everyone who's inside the building to shelter in place, because what the police want is to keep the threat contained so that they can apprehend the offender, and in apprehending the offender, keep the public more secure. The police are not worried about your personal safety. They are worried about the public safety. They are worried about the security of their town, of their district, of their commonwealth. And this actually went to court. I think it was in the late 80s. I have it here. This is Lynch versus North Carolina Department of Justice, circa 1989, to which the ruling was, and I quote, "Law enforcement agencies and personnel have no duty to protect individuals from the criminal acts of others. Instead, their duty is to preserve the peace and arrest lawbreakers for the protection of the general public." So this is very important to understand, because many police-aligned authors of security programs will try to get people to stay contained rather than participate in their own protection, which would be to put as much time and distance between you and the threat as possible. Now, this is not to say that the police are not very good at their job, that they are not a crucial member of our societal structure, but to think that the job of the police is to be your personal bodyguard, is to make sure that your house is fortified would be a mistake. That is not their job. Their job is the collective safety, not the individual safety. And so when you are putting together your own family readiness plan or your own personal security plan, or you are conducting your own home security audit, it is very important to understand that just because your house alarm goes off, the police are not immediately going to become running to your home to save you. Because if there are other more threatening occurrences going on, and in their triage, the hospital that is being directly targeted by an active shooter versus your home, which was robbed 3 hours ago, but you are no longer in a direct threat, you are not going to be their first priority. The immediate threat is going to be their priority, and then they're going to get to you when they can. So I think that's very important for people to understand that the role of the police is public safety, not your personal safety.
So, for example, in an active shooter situation, the police's job is to keep the casualty rate as low as possible. And if they have to make a decision that means 5 people will die so 100 people don't, that's their decision. And it will always be the decision. If you happen to be one of those 5 people, it's on you. You can't expect help to come.
I think what you want to do in that situation is you are your own authority. You have direct control over your ability to live or die, pretty much. So if you want to, I talk about in the book the safety trap of false authority, where the first plane had hit Tower 1, and everyone in Tower 2 who remembered when there was that bomb threat, in the early 90s, started making a run for it because they knew that they were being targeted. And they almost got all the way out before they were turned back around by Port Authority people who were basically telling them to return to their desks, that everything was fine. They had no authority to do that. They had no intel. They knew absolutely nothing that was going on. And had those people just chose to, and some people did, just chose to disregard that authority as being false because it was, ran away and lived. But those who heeded that false authority and returned to their desks did so faithfully, because we know what happened next when the second plane hit that second tower. So just if you are ever in a threatening situation, the best thing you can do is to put as much time and distance between you and harm as possible. If that means run. If that means climb out the window, climb out the window. I love these active shooter preparedness videos where you see a guy talking about 10 ways he can use his belt to keep a door shut. Meanwhile, there's a window on the first floor standing right behind him, and he makes no mention that that's your safest way out. My biggest problem with run, hide, fight is that it has gone from the military application that was taught in SEER school for pilots, which was, run as fast as you can away from the bad guys, or if you're taking, POW, get as fast to, get as far away as you can. And then in the need that you need to catch your breath, hide and camouflage yourself until you catch your breath, and then run some more to keep putting time and distance, keep putting as much time and distance between you and the bad guy as possible. And then if confronted, fight like your life depends on it, because it does. When that application was then brought into the school model, it has basically become run to your hiding spot. And that is not what that intention was all about. But it has become favorable for police because they want to keep the threat contained. The police don't want, like what happened in I think it was Parkland, where the shooter escaped with everyone else who was running away from the school, because that makes their job harder. That makes the community, that puts the community more at risk. But from an individual vantage point, if I have the choice between staying here as part of the collective or ensuring my own personal safety, and doing so by putting as much time and distance between me and the threat as possible, I can tell you exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to take people with me, but we're leaving. And if you want to come with me, not the whole like come with me if you want to live mantra, but you are your own authority in that situation. you know?
Absolutely. And it sounds like paying attention to policy and instructions, whether they're from the police or from an administrator or whoever, or a course that you took at work, and thinking about those incentives. What we're talking about here is police being very good at their job, and their job being a little bit different than maybe we thought it was. Just like the person who wrote the emergency plan at the office, their job isn't necessarily to save your life. And so incorporating those,
the
understanding
job of
those,
saving your life is your own.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, no, that's not like part of the social contract. No, that is part of the social contract. You are responsible for your own well-being. And we can no longer afford to live in a world where we simply hope that nothing will happen and then solely rely on the first responders to save us once something does. Everyday safety requires the participation of everyone. And that participation means having the awareness that something could go wrong, the preparedness to do something in the event that that risk becomes a reality so that you can stay safe. Awareness plus preparation equals safety.
Absolutely. I think it's so important. And as people become parents, even more important, because I'm not just responsible for my safety.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why anxiety over our inability to keep ourselves and our loved ones protected is at an all-time high, is because our understanding of what it means to stay safe is at an all-time low. We need to be engaged. We need to participate. We need to look for the warning signs. We need to look for the hazards. And when we see those hazards where there's warning signs, we need to know what to do as a result. You know, no one fears that which they know well. But the more we participate in whatever those protective endeavors are, the more we open our eyes to the realities of the world around us, the more prepared we can be to help that hazard on the horizon be managed toward its most favorable resolution. You know, like everyone, sees that, that awesome looking dresser on display in, the IKEA shop, and then they get it home and, they're faced with a million tiny pieces and an instruction set that looks like it was inspired by, Egyptian hieroglyphics. And they're like, how am I going to put this together? Start small, build strong. Just one day at a time, learn something new. The next day, learn something new. You just start slow, build strong, because each day, and this is why I kind of wrote the book in a very chunking format so that you can pick it up, you can read a couple of paragraphs and be like, okay, got it. That's my lesson of the day. I can just take this little piece of information and apply it to my everyday life. And over the course of that book, I am going to put myself in a better situation than I was before to ensure the certainty of safety for not just me, but for my family, so that we can live our very best lives the safest way possible.
I think that whole process starts with accepting permission and responsibility to be the point person for your own safety, understanding that the idea that police are responsible for your personal safety is a misconception.
100%.
Now, on to number 4. The number one risk to my personal safety is violent crime. And I get why it's there, because it's what grabs the media headlines. You don't sell a lot of tickets to a movie with Jason Statham installing slip grip things in his tub.
Right. Right. But it's true. No, the number one cause of death in America last year was, and for many years prior, heart disease.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which results from bad diet and poor exercise. So, I have a whole...
Listeners on my show will have heard this riff before, but, I was an athlete in grade school and middle school, became a wrestler, then a martial artist. But I always would say for the longest time that my first self-defense system was running a 6-minute mile.
Yeah.
And now that I'm a middle-aged, middle-class guy with more pounds in my middle than I like, jogging is, again, my primary form of self-defense for exactly the reason you just said. It's not a bugger that's going to get me. It's a heart attack. Yeah.
When was the last? I mean, I have a whole chapter in the book about the safety trap of physical fitness, because people think, I have a Peloton. Well, just because you ride your Peloton, 20 minutes a week doesn't mean you're going to have the confidence that you need to overcome a stressful situation. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, people think the misconception is violent crime, and it's not. The first thing is heart disease. And then number two is home accidents. Here, I wrote them down. The top five accidents: falls, fires, choking, poisoning, drowning. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All things you're probably going to do to yourself. You're going to burn yourself on the stove. You're going to, I mean, I was having a dinner last night and, something went down the wrong pipe and I was like, and then had to have a drink of water to get the bread the rest of the way down. And with children, poisoning and drowning, just putting things in their mouth that they shouldn't be putting into their mouth, or leaving a child unattended in the bathtub or the pool. And then we get into, workplace, then it's accidents at the workplace. Then, I mean, listen, most of us are going to live our lives free from plane crashes and terror attacks and active shooters and, getting mugged or, what have you. Like, most of us are going to die of old age, warm in our beds, surrounded by those who love us. But that does not mean that there aren't real risks out there. But to think that you're perfectly safe because the story that you saw on Action News last night, isn't going to, like, and listen, like the news stories love this, right? Gavin talks about this in The Gift of Fear about how it's this like slickly produced, if it bleeds, it leads. Because the entire like algorithm of social media and the news networks are about vitriol and violence and outrage, because that's what gets people engaged. If it was all like, hey, you know what, nothing really bad happened today, the president gave a speech and Congress is working on some stuff, and we'll follow up with you tomorrow, but and now here's your moment of zen. Like, that's not, they're not gonna rate, no one's gonna buy those advertising dollars. But which is why local news here in Austin will break into a car chase in California, because, hey, look, everyone's gonna, what's he gonna do? Is he gonna get away? No, he's not gonna get away. There's 15 cop cars and 3 helicopters, and 5 news helicopters like following his every move. We know how this is gonna end. He's gonna run out of gas, or he's gonna hit a car. He's gonna get out of the car. They're gonna get him arrested. And then the newscaster goes, man, not as bad as it could have been. Well, yeah, we know. But like, guess how many of us are ever going to be in a high-speed, police chase? Yeah. Very, very, very few. But
and I think it's important there to to also remember that saying that violence is vanishingly rare in North America doesn't mean we shouldn't be prepared for that and be alert for those risks. But I think the big misconception I see a lot, at least, is people who spend a lot of time in their Krav Maga class and at the range, but couldn't tell you the last time they charged their fire extinguisher, and haven't taken a first aid class since their boss made them when they got hired.
Right.
And to pay attention also, and more so, to the realistic accidents and personal health aspects of safety. They're just so important.
Well, I think that leads right into what we have for number 5, which is, I'm such a badass, I don't need to worry about safety. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's overconfidence. I mean, there is an overconfidence that is, it's 2 parts. One is how well calibrated we are. And what I mean by how well calibrated we are is, if you and I are going to the batting cages and I say, hey, well, there's 10 pitches that are going to come out for you and 10 pitches that are going to come out for me. And you say, oh, I'll hit about half. And I say, I'm going to hit most of them. And then you go out there and hit 5, and I go out there and hit 2. You are much better calibrated than I am, because your expectation of your capability is more in line with what you were actually able to perform. Whereas if I said, oh, I'm going to hit most of them and only hit 2, I am not well calibrated. I am overconfident in my ability. And then when faced with that realistic challenge, I'm going to fall short, and I'm going to fall short because I was not as prepared or as or capable as I thought I was. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, just because you know how to respond to a concern does not mean you know how to prevent a concern. We see this all the time with active shooters, right? With schools. Hey, schools are, there was an active shooter, so now we're gonna put in these cameras and these bulletproof blackboards, and we're gonna give the cop cars, we're gonna give the cops more tactical gear, and we're gonna give the ambulances bigger engines, and we're going to make the fire trucks be able to carry more water. But like, giving the cops more tactical gear does not prevent that crime from occurring. It just helps the cops to more effectively resolve that concern once it has arisen. Giving the fire department trucks that can carry more water is not going to prevent fires. It's just going to help them put out that fire once it becomes ablaze. Giving the ambulances faster engines will help get to that victim or that injured person to the hospital faster, but it's not going to prevent that person from being injured in the first place. Prevention, being proactive, knowing what, if it's school shootings, knowing that if we just help those who are hurting, if we have protective intelligence, if we address the real mental health concern. We just saw what happened in Colorado a couple days ago with that shooting at the
the grocery store.
Yeah. And clearly someone who was mentally ill, who had a history of paranoia and delusion. Yes, I'm a gun owner. I have a concealed carry weapon license, and I am 100% in agreement with comprehensive and legitimate gun control. But but taking away everyone's guns is not going to help solve the mental health crisis. We can litigate our way down to toothpicks in the lunch line, but that's not going to address the underlying concern. And if we continue to treat the symptoms of the disease without looking for an underlying cure, we are just going to condemn ourselves to watching the same thing happen over and over and over again.
I think that's hugely important, both at a policy level and a personal level. And one thing I did want to say about the book is it is an astonishingly compassionate book, considering the subject matter and your history in protection and violence management. That through line of help people who are hurting is the way that we will stop so many of the violent risks in our society. I think just needs to be drilled into again and again and again, and is just embarrassingly underserved for the degree of intelligence and education our society has.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, one of the reasons the inception point for this book was the tragedy at Sandy Hook. My parents were teachers. I have family and friends who still teach. And as awesome as educators as they all were, they were not trained protectors. I was. And what I realized in that moment was that, not everyone is going to have, not everyone is going to know the luxury of having their own security detail, but everyone deserves to be protected. And so what I really wanted to do with this book was give people the tools to help protect themselves. I want this book to be a force multiplier for our society on how to reduce risk, how to prevent violence, and how to live our very best life the safest way possible. And if I can help one person, two people, a country to succeed in, to lower their anxiety and live their very best life, then I'll be very happy with however many books this book sells.
I'd like to go down a level too, because we kind of talked about the policy level there with helping people who are hurting, school level level prevention, but also at the personal level. When I remember being in my 20s, my college roommate was a 6'7" judo guy, and I was a wrestler and a Muay Thai guy. We just took all kinds of ridiculous risks because we figured we could handle it. And I think that's part of most people's 20s. But as we get older, especially as we're parents, and we did smart things and stupid things. And but especially once we become parents, that prevention, that focus on prevention, or to take it out of the violent sphere, how many people do you know, how many times have you personally driven a little too fast, maybe not put on your seatbelt, maybe texted real quick because you're an excellent driver?
Right. And here's the thing is that, one of the things, my dad, who was a teacher and taught driver's ed, and one of the things he still champions to this day is you have to drive defensively. You have, because you can be the best driver in the world, but guess what? Most people in the world are not great drivers. And so you have to drive not offensively, but in anticipation of what everyone else is on the road is going to be doing. And if you can just look at your life, I always say that, like, people walk how they drive. People who, in and out of, if they're in the mall or on the sidewalk, who are bobbing and weaving through all kinds of people, they're probably going to drive in a very similar fashion. But the more we live our lives, the way that we drive our cars, checking the windows, looking for the person who's speeding up behind us, looking for those warning signs of harm, so that we can, anticipate and respond and work to keep ourselves safe by obeying the rules of the road and anticipating what other people are going to be doing. And, when we see the brake lights, 50 cars up and then 40, 30, like our foot instinctively goes to the brake. But watch a new driver do it, and you'll literally see them like look down as they, move their foot from the accelerator to the brake. What we want is to have those same outlooks repeatable, so that we can, we can put them into other aspects of our lives. And, much like you were saying about, like, when we were all in our 20s, and especially myself, taking those unnecessary risks, what I hope to demonstrate with the book, with those real world, life stories of, what happened to these real world people and how I was able to help make that bad thing better, was so that you can be like, oh, I can learn this lesson without having it happen to me. You know what I mean? I can see where, and one of the things I also tried to do with the book was I tried to not make it like, oh, if you did this, you're stupid. Because a lot of it is just information that we have, and then how we're interpreting that information. Like, is that a ball, or is that a ball that's full of air, or is that a steel ball that's, solid and heavy? Like, they're not, just because it's spherical doesn't mean it's the same thing. So vantage point matters, outlook matters, experience matters. And what I want the book to be able to provide to the everyday reader, from the second grader to the CEO, is here are examples of where people had a false sense of security and made decisions based on that outlook that ultimately became problematic. And here's why they decided to go left instead of right. But here's where, if you had just looked at it this way, you would have seen that going right was the correct way to go about it. I mean, while I was writing that book, I used very real world stories that I had been directly involved in myself, so that people didn't think, well, oh, that's never going to happen. I'm not worried about like the alien invasion, or, getting hit with like an electromagnetic, or some kind of like electromagnetic attack. But being overconfident, being, having avoiding a problem until it became, it became, too big of a crisis to manage effectively and required additional help, are all real world instances of harm where, if we had just been willing to see the warning signs, we could have prevented harm from happening.
And in many cases, you walk into it thinking, well, I can handle it if things go bad. And sometimes you're right, but wouldn't you rather have not had to deal with it? Because the emergency room is an enormous pain in the ass.
Yeah. I mean, one of my buddies, but one of my clients introduced me to, he's pretty much like the number one crisis management guy in the country. And I've worked with several clients, many clients who I work with, he has also helped them to manage their own crisis. And he always says, the crisis management 101, avoid the crisis. Like, You know what I mean? The best way to remedy this situation is to have not gotten yourself into this situation yourself. And I'm sure you see this all the time, right? With your own like self-defense work. People come to you and be like, hey, so like if I'm handcuffed in the back of a trunk, like how do I get myself out of that? I'm like, oh, well, don't get yourself handcuffed and put in the back of a trunk would be step one. Like you made there were so many decision points. Like you don't just like go to bed, like, you know, safe and sound in your own bed and then wake up, you know, handcuffed in the back of a trunk. Like many things happened on that path to escalation. And
are you familiar with Rory Miller? He's a self-defense author. No, he's a self-defense author, conflict communication, Chiron training. We'll have to remedy that because you guys house on fire.
Yeah.
But one of his taglines is, you know, the best technique for not getting stabbed, don't be the kind of asshole people want to stab.
Good point. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or it's like that old thing, like the Dyke doctor, it hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah.
Well, this was a lot of fun. So, I'm looking forward to round 2.
Absolutely, folks. Go on over to Coursen's Corner to find the next 5 most common misconceptions about safety folks have. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Spencer, for coming on today.
Absolute pleasure.
And we'll see everybody next time. Stay safe.
Cheers.
Thank you for watching today. I hope you found something useful or maybe even inspiring. If you liked what you saw, please take a few minutes to subscribe, like, and comment. Those little things add up to big help for the channel. If you loved it, consider checking out our Facebook page for more family safety news and information. And think about supporting us on Patreon, where you'll get early access, monthly training resources, blooper footage, and other exclusive benefits. You'll find links to both in the show notes. Most of all, thank you for being part of the safest family on the block team. Stay safe, everybody. See you next time.